What if a single act of bravery could change two lives forever? Don't go in. The roof's about to give, voices shouted through the smoke. But Rachel Morgan didn't stop, barefoot in the snow, blood streaking down her arms. She smashed through the window with flames at her back and ash in her hair. She carried the boy out before anyone could thank her. She was gone, leaving behind only footprints and a singed cotton bracelet. Who was that woman? And why, 2 decades later, would a billionaire search the world just to find her? Could one selfless choice rewrite a town's history? Rachel Morgan's world was small but full. Brookfield, Vermont was the kind of place where everyone waved on Main Street. The same barbershop had been there for 40 years. And every winter, the town square became a snow globe come to life. But inside that quiet, picture-perfect town, Rachel carried storms no one could see. At 29, Rachel was a single mother raising her 5-year-old daughter Sophie in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a bakery. She worked the night shift as an emergency dispatcher, the voice people clung to when their lives fell apart. For most, the sound of Rachel's calm, steady voice over the phone was just the line between chaos and help. But few knew how hard she worked to hold herself together once she hung up. Her apartment walls were lined with Sophie's drawings, stick figure princesses, lopsided rainbows, and pictures of the two of them holding hands. But among those cheerful images, one photo always stood out. It was old and worn in a plain wooden frame on her nightstand. Mark Morgan, Rachel's father, in his firefighter uniform, smiling proudly in front of Engine 3. His face was young, but his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too much. That picture was the last taken before he died. Mark had been a local hero. When a daycare center caught fire one October afternoon, he was the one who ran in and didn't come back out. He saved every child in that building except himself. Rachel was 12 at the time. His funeral was the largest Brookfield had ever seen. There were parades of fire engines, men and women in uniform saluting in the streets. A folded flag placed in her mother's trembling hands. And at the heart of it, a little girl clutching her father's helmet, too young to understand what forever meant. Growing up, Rachel swore she'd never follow his path. She told herself she'd find a safe life, no flames, no sirens, no broken families standing in doorways. And for a while, it seemed possible. She fell in love, married quickly, had Sophie, a bright, curious child with her father's smile. But when Sophie was 2, her husband walked out and Rachel was left staring down the life she never wanted to carry alone. That was when she applied to be a dispatcher. It was a compromise, she told herself. She wasn't on the front lines. She was the calm in the storm, the voice in someone's ear when they were at their worst. And if there was a part of her that wanted to make her father proud, to keep his memory alive in her own quiet way, she never said it out loud. Rachel's nights were long and filled with every emergency a small town could throw at her: heart attacks, car accidents on icy roads, domestic disputes that left her shaking long after the calls ended. But she stayed steady because people depended on her and because Sophie needed her to come home in one piece. Yet beneath her composure lived a deep, gnawing fear. She wrestled with it in the dark hours of the morning. When she came home, slipped off her shoes and peeked into Sophie's room, watching her daughter sleep, she sometimes wondered if, faced with the moment her father had known the choice between safety and sacrifice, what would she do? Could she run into fire? Would she have the same courage? Or had fear made her into someone smaller, more cautious? On the fridge, Sophie had taped up a new drawing just that week, a picture of herself, Rachel, in a stick figure man with a badge in a big red truck. Grandpa Mark, Sophie had written carefully underneath in her wobbly kindergarten letters. Rachel stared at it for a long time that night, feeling the strange weight of legacy, how it could live in the smallest hands, the simplest pictures. Rachel didn't think of herself as brave. She thought of herself as a woman surviving day by day, paying bills, making sure her daughter's coat was zipped in the morning, keeping her world from falling apart. But sometimes late at night when Sophie was asleep and the house was quiet, she'd run her fingers over the old framed photo on her nightstand. And in those moments, even she wondered when the moment came, when it was her turn to choose, would she know what to do? It was one of those bitter December nights when the cold felt alive, crawling through every crack in the window, rattling the trees like bones. Rachel's shift had ended late. And as usual, she was exhausted. Her breath fogged the windshield as she drove home, fingers tight on the steering wheel, headlights carving a pale tunnel through the snow-covered road. Sophie was staying with their neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, as she often did on Rachel's night shifts. The apartment would be cold, quiet, but Rachel didn't mind. All she wanted was to slip under the covers and close her eyes for a few stolen hours before Sophie's small, warm body climbed into bed beside her. As she rounded the curve onto Pinehurst Road, a strange glow cut through the trees. For a second, Rachel thought it was the moon catching on ice. But as she got closer, the glow pulsed orange, flickering wrong. Her heart tightened. She slowed, rolling down the window. That was when the smell hit her, smoke. Rachel's stomach flipped. She pulled over hard, tires crunching into the snowbank. Ahead, partially hidden behind a row of pine trees, a wooden cabin was burning. Flames licked up the sides, thick smoke billowing into the night sky. Rachel's dispatcher instincts kicked in before the panic had a chance to settle. She grabbed her phone, hands already trembling. Structure fire on Pinehurst west of the curve. Cabin fully engulfed. Get units here fast. But as she stepped out of the car barefoot in the snow now, she didn't even remember slipping out of her shoes. She saw something that froze her in place. A small face in the window. A boy, maybe 6 years old. His fist pounded against the glass. His mouth open in a silent scream. The door was a wall of flames. Neighbors had gathered, clutching their coats tight, some shouting, some frozen in place. Someone yelled, "The propane tank's in the back." Another voice, panicked, said, "The fire trucks won't get here in time." Rachel's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. An older woman grabbed her arm. "Don't go in, honey. You have a child. Think of your little girl." Rachel heard her own voice, distant and hollow, whispering, "Not one more child. Not if I can help it." Her father's face flashed across her mind, smiling at her from that old photo, brave, reckless, forever frozen at 35. The crowd's voices blurred as Rachel peeled off her coat, wrapped it around her arm, and sprinted toward the cabin. Someone shouted behind her, "The roof's going to give." But the words were muffled by the roar of the fire. The snow was sharp and biting under her bare feet, but adrenaline numbed the pain. She circled around the cabin, eyes searching for a way in. On the east side, the flames hadn't reached the window yet. A narrow shot at survival. She took it, wrapping her coat tighter. She smashed her arm through the window. Glass shattered, slicing into her skin, but she barely noticed. Smoke billowed out, choking and acrid. Rachel hoisted herself through, knees hitting the floor hard. Inside was chaos. The heat was overwhelming, the air thick and bitter. Dropping to her hands and knees, Rachel called out hoarsely, "Where are you?" A faint cry answered her. A small, terrified sound under a nearby table. She crawled toward the sound, smoke blinding her, lungs burning, her hands closed around the boy, pajamas singed, face streaked with soot and tears. He clung to her in terror. "It's okay, baby," Rachel murmured, wrapping part of her torn shirt around his mouth. "We're getting out." Every muscle in her body screamed as she pulled the boy across the room back toward the broken window. A sudden crack split the air. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind them, showering the floor with burning embers. Rachel didn't stop. With the last of her strength, she lifted the boy through the window into waiting arms outside. For a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then she climbed out herself, coughing, shaking, bleeding, but alive. Neighbors rushed forward, wrapping blankets around the child. But before anyone could thank her, before anyone could even ask her name, Rachel turned silent, barefoot in the snow. She walked back to her car, slipped into the driver's seat, and disappeared into the night. Behind her, only footprints remained, and a singed cotton bracelet fallen from her wrist, left in the snow like a forgotten clue. The next morning, Brookfield woke to whispers. The fire on Pinehurst Road had rattled the quiet town. Neighbors swapped stories at the bakery, the gas station, the post office. Everyone spoke of the mysterious woman, barefoot, bleeding, who had vanished before the sirens even arrived. Some swore she was an angel. Others thought she was a drifter, someone passing through who'd stumbled into heroism. No one suspected Rachel Morgan. Rachel sat alone at her kitchen table, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in front of her. Her hands trembled slightly, wrapped in clean gauze. The cuts from the glass had been worse than she'd admitted to herself, 15 stitches on her arm, burns across her forearms. She told the nurse in the ER it was a kitchen accident. She told her boss she was just feeling under the weather. She told Sophie nothing, but the body keeps its own truth. By the time Sophie came home from Mrs. Holloway's, Rachel was curled up on the couch, trying to hide her pain beneath a blanket. Sophie climbed into her lap, chattering about preschool, showing off a new drawing. A picture of their apartment, stick figure Rachel with a ponytail, Sophie in a bright pink dress. In the corner, Rachel noticed Sophie had drawn a little figure in a red truck. Grandpa Mark, her heart clenched. She kissed the top of Sophie's head and whispered, "Mommy's just tired today, sweetheart." But fatigue wasn't the only thing pressing on her. At the dispatch center, questions were already circling. Rachel had signed off shift late, but security footage from the gas station near Pinehurst showed her car driving toward the fire. Her supervisor, Frank, called her in. "We're proud of you, Rachel," he said carefully. "But you can't just leave your post, even off the clock. Procedures matter." She sat there in his office, bandaged arms folded in her lap, nodding mechanically, knowing that no explanation would satisfy protocol. By the end of the week, Rachel had taken unpaid leave. By the end of the month, she'd quietly resigned. Her world shrank, bills piled up, and without the dispatcher job, she started night shifts at the bakery downstairs, kneading dough with burned hands, packing boxes with sore arms. The bakery owner, Mr. Jensen, never asked about her scars. For that, Rachel was quietly grateful. Meanwhile, across town, another story was unfolding. The boy Rachel saved, Ethan Walker, was struggling in his own way. His parents had died in a car crash the year before, leaving him in the care of his grandmother, Miriam Walker. That night, Miriam had been at her nursing shift when the Christmas lights sparked the fire. Afterward, Ethan barely spoke. His words shrank to whispers. His eyes carried the weight of smoke and fear. But one thing lit a spark in him. He began to draw over and over on napkins, on scraps of paper, on the backs of grocery lists, a woman. A woman with a ponytail, tears on her face, and distinctive marks on her arms. His grandmother tried to ask him about the drawings, but all Ethan would say was, "She came back for me." Miriam found the cotton bracelet in the snow outside the cabin. It was singed, blackened at the edges, the kind children made with thread and beads, clumsy and beloved. Ethan tucked it under his pillow at night. To him, it wasn't just a bracelet. It was proof that someone had seen him, chosen him, saved him. Back in Rachel's apartment, life settled into a painful rhythm. Her wounds healed, but the scars remained, silver lines on her skin. Quiet witnesses to a night no one knew had been hers. She wore long sleeves, even in the heat of summer. She folded away the memory just like she folded the bakery aprons, just like she folded Sophie's tiny clothes, tucked it in, pressed it flat, made it small, and she told herself it was enough. But sometimes late at night when Sophie was asleep and the house was still, Rachel would trace the outline of her scars, close her eyes, and remember the boy's face in the firelight. She would hear again the sound of his breathing as she carried him through the snow, feel the sting of the glass, the weight of his little body in her arms. She never expected anyone to know. She never expected thanks or recognition. Because Rachel Morgan understood something the world often forgot. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage are the ones done quietly, without witnesses, without applause. The kind that leave you standing barefoot in the snow, vanishing into the night, leaving only footprints and a singed cotton bracelet behind. Years slipped by like pages in a book, each chapter leaving its mark on Ethan Walker's life. After the fire, Ethan became known around Brookfield as the lucky one. But survival carried its own weight. He rarely spoke about that night except through his drawings. His grandmother Miriam watched as he filled sketchbooks with image after image of the woman with the ponytail, the woman who saved him. His therapist called it a coping mechanism. Miriam called it a miracle. The bracelet became his treasure, singed at the edges, its threads half burned. It was the last piece of a night that changed everything. Miriam placed it in a small wooden box, one Ethan kept under his bed. When nightmares came, when the fear of losing someone else became too much, Ethan would pull it out, clutch it in his small hands, and whisper, "She came back for me." As Ethan grew, his fascination with the woman evolved into a quiet determination to understand courage, to live up to the sacrifice made for him. He became the boy who stood up for others. When classmates were bullied, Ethan stepped in. When someone struggled with homework, he stayed late. When teachers needed help after school, Ethan volunteered. Miriam watched with quiet pride as the boy who had once trembled in his sleep became a young man others leaned on. But hardship never truly loosened its grip. Miriam's health began to fail when Ethan was 14. One winter night, he sat by her bedside, holding her hand as she whispered, "You have a gift, Ethan. Don't waste it. And someday, find her." By 16, Ethan was living with a foster family, but he never forgot Miriam's words. They became the compass by which he steered his life. In school, he excelled, especially in computers and coding. While other teens played video games, Ethan was building them. By 18, he had created a cybersecurity program so effective, his teachers urged him to enter it in state competitions. By 19, he had attracted the attention of investors. And by 22, Ethan Walker was no longer a quiet boy from a small town. He was Ethan Harris, taking his grandmother's maiden name. Ethan redefined himself, a symbol of starting over, of honoring the woman who raised him. He became the founder and CEO of SafeNet Security, a company that revolutionized data protection for governments, hospitals, and businesses worldwide. But even as his net worth soared, even as headlines called him a tech wunderkind and the next Silicon Valley visionary, Ethan's heart remained tethered to a small town and a woman no one could name. He never stopped looking for her. Behind the scenes, Ethan hired private investigators. He combed hospital records for burn treatments from that December night. He tracked down witnesses. He offered anonymous donations to the Brookfield Fire Department, hoping someone someday might remember something. And in his office, in the sleek tower overlooking San Francisco Bay, that small wooden box from his childhood sat on the shelf. The cotton bracelet still inside, weathered and delicate. Ethan's staff thought it was a lucky charm. To him, it was everything. Interviews often circled back to his past. "What drives you, Ethan?" reporters asked. "What keeps you grounded?" Ethan would smile faintly, fingertips brushing the edge of the bracelet box, and say, "There's someone I owe everything to." When a journalist once pushed, "If you could go back in time, what's the one thing you'd change?" Ethan answered without hesitation, "I'd find the woman who saved my life, and I'd tell her what she gave me." His employees knew better than to ask. His inner circle learned to leave the topic alone, but the search never stopped. Then one day, everything shifted. A local reporter in Brookfield chasing a human interest piece on the old fire station stumbled across a name, Rachel Morgan. A quiet bakery worker, former dispatcher, history of burns, and unexplained injuries dating back 20 years. A connection was made. An envelope was sent. A photograph arrived. Rachel, now 49, stood frozen in her tiny apartment, staring at a grainy image of herself from that night, ponytail, bleeding arms, barefoot in the snow, cradling a boy as flames roared behind her. Her world tilted. And across the country, in a glass office tower, Ethan Harris prepared to do what he had waited 2 decades to do. Come home. The town of Brookfield had never seen anything like it. On a crisp autumn morning, 4 black SUVs rolled down Main Street, their polished exteriors gleaming under the Vermont sun. Curious locals gathered on the sidewalks, whispering and pointing, craning their necks for a glimpse. Reporters had already arrived. Regional stations, national news, even international outlets. Something big was happening, and everyone wanted to know why. Ethan Harris stepped out of the second SUV wearing a simple navy coat over jeans, his hair a little windswept, his eyes serious but kind. For all his wealth and fame, he moved through the crowd with quiet humility. He nodded to the mayor, shook hands with the fire chief, and turned toward the rows of cameras waiting near the old Brookfield fire station. The cameras clicked as Ethan took the podium, a portable screen set up beside him. He paused for a long moment, looking over the gathered crowd. Many of the faces were unfamiliar, but somewhere in that sea of people he hoped was the one face that had shaped his life. 20 years ago, Ethan began, his voice carrying across the square, I was a scared 6-year-old boy trapped in a burning cabin on Pinehurst Road. The experts said I had less than 2 minutes to live. The fire department was 7 minutes away. But someone, a stranger, changed those numbers. The crowd fell into a hush. A quiet beep sounded and the screen beside him flickered to life, showing grainy security camera footage. A woman with a ponytail, barefoot, bloodied, carrying a child away from a burning house. Gasps rippled through the audience. Some covered their mouths. Others whispered to their neighbors. Ethan's voice softened. For 20 years, I've searched for her. I've looked in hospital records, old news archives, even bakery staff rosters. His lips lifted into a small, almost shy smile. I didn't know her name, but I never forgot her face. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the small wooden box. With care, he opened it and lifted out the singed cotton bracelet, holding it up for the cameras. This fell from her wrist as she carried me to safety. It has been my reminder every day of what courage means. The crowd was motionless. Today, Ethan continued, his voice tightening with emotion, I'm here to honor that woman. I've purchased the Brookfield Fire Station and the surrounding property. We'll be rebuilding it as a state-of-the-art emergency response center. And I've asked the town council to approve one condition, that it be named after the woman who showed me and all of us what bravery truly looks like. He stepped back, taking a shaky breath. Rachel Morgan, if you're here, this belongs to you. At the edge of the crowd near the old maple tree where the autumn leaves fell like slow-moving fire, Rachel stood frozen. Her heart pounded so hard it was a wonder no one could hear it. Her hands trembled at her sides. She hadn't planned to come. She had watched everything on TV, thinking she could stay home safe behind closed doors. But when the moment came, something stronger than fear had pulled her to the square. Now, as Ethan's words drifted across the crowd, Rachel stepped forward. A murmur rippled through the people as they parted for her. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the silvery scars that spiraled up her arm, scars that perfectly matched those on the woman in the video. Ethan's eyes met hers. For a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. The frightened boy and the brave woman from 20 years ago, now standing face to face as adults. Ethan's breath caught. The bracelet slipped slightly in his grasp. You kept it all this time, Rachel said quietly, her voice rough with nerves. Ethan gave a small laugh, thick with emotion. It was all I had of you. The crowd erupted into applause, tears echoing down Main Street as people clapped, some with tears in their eyes. Rachel's daughter, Sophie, now a young woman, broke through the crowd and wrapped her arms around her mother, laughing and crying at the same time. In that moment, Rachel understood something she had never allowed herself to believe. Her story didn't have to stay hidden. Her courage didn't have to stay secret. And sometimes, even after 20 years, the world remembers. The grand opening of the Rachel Morgan Emergency Response Center was unlike anything Brookfield had ever seen. Fire trucks lined the street, their polished sides gleaming under the autumn sun. Children waved miniature flags. Families gathered on blankets across the town square and the local high school band played a soft, steady tune in the background. But the heart of the day was not the ceremony. It was Rachel herself. For the first time in decades, Rachel stood before her town, no longer hidden in the shadows. Her arms, once always covered, now bore their scars without shame. She wore a simple short-sleeved blouse, her silvered skin catching the sunlight like a quiet badge of honor. As she stepped up to the podium, a hush settled over the crowd. Rachel's voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. I never wanted recognition, she began. I just couldn't stand still when someone needed help. And for years, I thought that was enough, to know quietly in my heart that I had done the right thing. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the faces before her, from old neighbors to young strangers to Sophie standing proudly near the stage. But sometimes, Rachel continued softly, we need to remember that sharing our stories matters because courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway. As the crowd erupted into applause, Ethan joined her on the stage, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Together, they held up the restored cotton bracelet, now framed behind glass, and presented it to the town as a symbol of sacrifice and hope. Over the next year, Rachel's life transformed in ways she never expected. She was invited to speak at schools and community centers, sharing her story with children who hung on her every word. She worked part-time at the new emergency center, training young dispatchers with the calm voice they would need in moments of crisis. And most importantly, Rachel and Sophie found new strength in each other, rebuilding a life that no longer needed to hide. For Ethan, the act of finding Rachel brought him a peace he had long sought. The bracelet, once his private talisman, now hung on the wall of the main training room next to a plaque that read, "Courage is a decision made in seconds that echoes across lifetimes." Brookfield changed, too. The town learned that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones quietly living among us. And as people walked past the emergency center each day, they were reminded not only of Rachel and Ethan, but of every unsung hero who chooses to act when it matters most. Rachel often said when speaking to young people, "We all get a moment. A moment that defines who we are. When yours comes, I hope you'll choose to be brave." Because as Rachel Morgan learned, even a single quiet act of courage can ripple through the world, leaving a legacy no one ever forgets. Rachel Morgan's story reminds us of something timeless. Courage often comes quietly. In today's world filled with social media likes, viral headlines, and constant noise, we sometimes forget that true heroism doesn't always make the news. It happens in small moments, when a neighbor checks on an elderly couple during a storm, when someone steps in to help a stranger, or when a single mother sacrifices for her child without expecting applause. Rachel's journey also teaches us the power of legacy. What we do today can ripple across decades, shaping lives we may never see. That's a lesson many older Americans understand deeply: the quiet acts of love and sacrifice that build families, strengthen communities, and inspire future generations. But here's the question for you, our viewers. Do you think society today still values quiet courage, or do we only notice heroism when it goes viral? And have you ever witnessed or been part of a small life-changing act that no one else saw? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Share your own stories of bravery, sacrifice, or quiet kindness. Thank you for joining us for this incredible journey. If you were moved by Rachel's story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more inspiring stories together. Let's celebrate the everyday heroes all around. Final note by Courageous Voices: thank you for joining us on this journey of courage and compassion.